and welcome everyone. We're so glad that you are here with us today for Tales by the Sea. My name is Erin and this is Brianna, my 6-month-old daughter. So my apologies, I will be muted throughout the show out of respect, and out of much love and respect to our storytellers tonight. I will be muting all of you as well, and just so we can hear the tellers a little bit more clearly. And so we are glad that you are here. We're going to have a time at the end where you can unmute and ask questions and share your appreciation with the tellers. But in the meantime, I'm going to mute all of you with lots and lots of love. And I think that is the only housekeeping that I have for us tonight, except afterwards, within about a week or so, we will have a recording of our time together for you to be able to go back and watch. And I know for me, it's always a joy to go back and listen to the stories again. I always hear something new in the stories. And so I just want to express my gratitude for the tellers who are giving of their time and talents to be with us here tonight, and our deep appreciation to Ann Buxley, who leads us in Tales by the Sea. And so welcome. We are glad that you are here, and I'm going to turn it over to Ann.
I love your welcome, Erin. Okay, and I'm always kind of astonished and very thankful for those tellers who choose to take up the challenge, really, of a theme that they have to find their way into. And the theme tonight is an unlikely place. And I know for me, the last few years have been an unlikely place to be in. So at any rate, I'm grateful for these tellers for mining that theme. And I asked the tellers to share.
Not the other thing.
I asked the tellers to share a quote which I use to introduce them, and I found a quote I want to use for me. And it has to do with our environment. Our environment
would rather
have always been soft to the touch, defined by how we translate them. Mine or ours, or simply here, the place where we happen to enjoy the outrageous luxury of remaining momentarily alive together. The outrageous luxury we have of being together right now, alive. So we're going to get right into it. Our first teller gave me a quote by Brahma Kumaris. It is, "The lie you tell today will force you to lie again tomorrow." Please welcome Roxanne Reese.
Thank you, Ann. Hi, everybody. The title of my story is Toussaint and Mukti. Toussaint and Mukti were two beautiful and loving parakeets whose cage door was always open. I was living in New York City at the time in a high-rise on the 37th floor. Toussaint and Mukti had free will to fly around my apartment and return to their cage whenever they felt to do so. Toussaint was given to me by my boyfriend at the time, and I decided to name him after Toussaint Louverture, one of the love poems I performed in the Broadway show for Color Girls. Mukti was my friend Michelle's bird, and it just so happened that her boyfriend gave Mukti to her, and she decided to name him after her guru, Baba Muktananda, Mukti for short. Michelle and I met when we went for Color Girls. So when she asked me to take care of Mukti while she went out of town to do another job, I didn't hesitate. Of course, Michelle, I'll take good care of Mukti. You know me. You don't have to worry about Mukti. And I'm quite sure Mukti and Toussaint will get along just fine. Mukti and Toussaint got along more than fine. They were magical. They would fly around my apartment in harmonious synchronicity that gave me delight to watch. And then they would fly on my shoulders and be in whatever room I was in. They would fly and look on the land on the window's ledge or on my shoulders, pecking me with gentle kisses. One day I was out on the balcony taking in some sun when the phone rang and startled me from my meditative slumber. I ran to the balcony door and to open it that I had closed earlier to make sure Mukti and Toussaint wouldn't fly away. I ran through the living room into the kitchen to answer the phone, and Mukti and Toussaint followed me into the kitchen and landed on the window's ledge there. When I finished my phone conversation, I was heading back to the balcony when I noticed that I had left the balcony door open. Mukti and Toussaint were in flight, heading that way, and I screamed, "Toussaint! Toussaint!" Toussaint landed on the window's ledge, and Mukti flew out the balcony door. I gathered Toussaint and put him in his cage, and I ran out on the balcony, calling frantically, "Mukti, Mukti, Mukti." I looked up and down to see if he had landed on one of my neighbors' balconies. "Mukti, Mukti." Each call for Mukti became more and more desperate when there was no response from him. "Mukti." My friend had trusted me to take care of her bird that was so precious to her. Michelle had often said that she felt Mukti was an extension of the love of the pure love that she felt from her boyfriend. How was I going to tell my friend that Mukti flew the coop? I panicked. The thought of calling Michelle to tell her what happened to Mukti wasn't an option. So in that moment, I found myself in an unlikely place, a place that was not like my personality, a place that would be full of cover-up, a place of deceit and a lie. I decided in that moment to replace Mukti with another bird that looked like him. So there I was with my deceitful 26-year-old self at the pet store, looking for an imposter bird that I could deceive my friend Michelle with and say it was Mukti. Michelle was in town for a few days and called to see if she could come by to see Mukti. Mukti and Toussaint, imposter Mukti, and Toussaint were on the window's ledge. And Michelle called out, "Mukti, Mukti, your mother's home, Mukti." Mukti kind of looked, and Michelle said, "I guess I've been gone too long." And I said, "Oh, Michelle, no, it's not that. It's because they have each other. Toussaint sometimes ignores me too." Michelle tried to get another response from Mukti. "Mukti, Mukti." And then she said, "He looks different." Mukti too was shedding his feathers. So another lie rolled off my tongue. "Oh, Michelle, he looks different because that's called molting. Molting is when parakeets shed their old feathers to get new ones. You know, like a snake sheds his skin and then slithers away." Michelle looked back at Mukti and looked at me. I could tell she sensed something wasn't right, but she didn't say anything. I kept the lie to myself. Imposter Mukti and Toussaint got along, but the magic was gone. About a month later, Michelle was back in New York, and as fate would have it, we were cast in the same workshop production. One day, we were heading home on the A train after rehearsal, and Michelle said to me, "Roxanne, I'm coming to get Mukti." I couldn't lie to my friend any longer. The burden was too much to bear. So I just blurted out, "Michelle, that ain't your bird." Michelle looked puzzled. I told Michelle what had happened and what I had done, and Michelle stoically got up from her seat and proceeded to walk to the other end of the train and sat down. I was ashamed. I was ashamed, but yet relieved that I didn't have to lie to my friend any longer. A few days later, the phone rang. It was Michelle, letting me have it. Why? Why did you feel you had to lie to me, Roxanne? And then try to deceive me by going to get another bird and pretend it was Mukti? Michelle, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to disappoint you. Please forgive me. Michelle wasn't having it. She said, "I got one question to ask you before I hang up this phone." "Yes." "What day did Mukti fly away?" I told her what day it was. And as it turned out, it was the same day that Michelle told her boyfriend, who had given Mukti to her, that she was in love with another man who ended up being her husband. After many, many, many tearful apologies and sorries, Michelle took the high road. And she viewed Mukti's departure as a spiritual letting go of a love that no longer existed. In time, I was forgiven, and Michelle and I are still great friends today. Thank you. That's my Toussaint. Oh, that's me and my Toussaint. Oh, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Ann.
Roxanne, thank you for that, for that story. You know, when you said what a burden it was. Yeah, deceiving is a burden.
It is a burden. I couldn't lie anymore. I just couldn't tell, and she was going to bring him home. And so I couldn't let her bring a bird that was not her bird to her home. So
it can just take a long time to undo the damage.
Yeah, it did. It did. But like I said, we're still great friends today, and she forgave me, and we laugh at that story now.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Roxanne, for sharing it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, our next teller has a piece of advice from Stephen Wright. This is his quote. "If at first you don't succeed, then skydiving definitely isn't for you." That's by Stephen Wright. Let's welcome Carlos Kotkin now. Where are you? There you are.
I'm here. Can everybody see and hear me? Jazz hands. Okay, thank you, Roxanne. That was a great story. You shouldn't have told your friend. Poor Mukti. We've never found out what happened to that bird. Probably lived a life. Probably had a great life. Okay, so we'll find out later in the question. Somebody asked Roxy afterwards if we know over what happened to the bird. I have a cold, so I'm hopped up on Dayquil, and when I'm done telling the story, I'm gonna respectfully say goodnight. So here we go, and it's nice to see. I don't usually see people in their homes. Hi, Betty. When I'm doing a show, that's the nice thing about Zoom. I see there's people from Maryland and Canada. Otherwise, I don't know Michael P. or Peg Quinn, but you look nice, and I like your backgrounds. Okay, here we go with my 12-minute story. I've already eaten so much time up. Here we go. Okay, so about a year into our marriage, my wife and I decided we were ready for the adventure of having a child. Even though we were ready, it wasn't happening. I got the impression my wife was starting to worry because one night as we were watching television, she turned to me and casually said, "I think you're the problem." She had no medical background. She was simply going by a woman's intuition. So to set her mind at ease, I went to see my doctor, Dr. Rodriguez. Very good doctor, smart, to the point, probably in her mid to late 30s. I told her my wife and I were trying to have a kid, but so far, no luck. Dr. Rodriguez said that she would refer me to a fertility clinic. And in the meantime, she suggested that my wife and I have sex 3 times a week. I asked if she could please put that in writing. And she did. Like I said, very, very good doctor. A few weeks later, I went to the fertility clinic alone. A lab tech led me to a small room about the size of a department store dressing room. She handed me a specimen cup, closed the door. The room had a sink, a chair, a TV, and a DVD entitled Young and Horny Volume 4. A sticker on the DVD read, "Property of Fertility Clinic, please do not remove." I didn't remove, I didn't even watch it. I just wanted to get out of there. So without the use of visual aids, I started taking the test. It was difficult to concentrate because I could hear 2 women on the other side of the door deciding whether to grab lunch at the Olive Garden or Marie Callender's. They chose Olive Garden, and that put me over the top. Once I completed my mission, I realized there wasn't a secret bank drawer where I could discreetly leave my sample. So I had to exit the room, cup in hand, walk down the hall, passing pretty much all the employees. Cheers. Until I got to the last desk where a ponytailed woman was working. She smiled, she thanked me, and I did my best to pretend I hadn't just masturbated and placed a cup of semen on her desk. The next day, I got a call with the results. The results indicated I was the problem. My count came in at 17 million, which 17 million might be a high balance at Wells Fargo, but at the sperm bank, below the poverty line. I wasn't sure how I was going to deliver the news to my wife when she got home from work, but it turns out when she got home, she had news for me. She was pregnant. I had 2 immediate thoughts. One was she was obviously already pregnant when I drove to that office building and touched myself. So I wasn't taking a test. I was just having a good time. 2, I was going to be a father. Incredible. We heard the baby's heartbeat during our first appointment with the obstetrician. I asked the doctor for the baby's due date. She took out her phone and used an app to calculate it. October 12th, she said. From that moment on, October 12th became a date that loomed large. It was like when a hurricane is shown on a weather map getting bigger and bigger. Only in my case, it was my wife's belly. By the time my wife looked like she had a basketball under her shirt, the baby was moving a lot, but I kept missing it. One night when the baby was particularly active, my wife said, "Come here, come here, hurry." She put my hand on her stomach. I waited. Nothing happened. And so I commented, this is kind of like whale watching. In retrospect, that's a stupid thing to say to your pregnant wife. I just meant that every time that I've gone whale watching, it's been hours and hours of waiting for something to happen and nothing happens. Still, stupid thing to say to your wife. I didn't know what I was doing. This was a new experience for me, for my wife too. We ended up having dinner with our friends, Anne and Mark. We were hoping to get pointers from them. They had 3 kids, so they had plenty of insight. Mark was upset when he found out I didn't have a birth plan. You have to have a birth plan. He said, you need to know where to park. Is she going to get an epidural? Is there going to be a shaman in the room? You need to know these things. I hadn't thought of any of this because early on, my wife decided she did not want me in the delivery room. She wanted to do this completely on her own. I was surprised, but I didn't protest based on my limited knowledge of delivering a child. It sounded like an uncomfortable experience, and I didn't want to make my wife more uncomfortable by being there. There's a small park on the grounds of the hospital. I decided the day our child was born, I would sit on a bench in the park, maybe have a snack, and at some point I would get a text. Come meet your baby, smiley face. I pictured myself sitting in that park on October 12th many, many times. However, on August 12th, exactly 2 months before October 12th, my wife woke me up around 10:30 at night. And with concern, she said, something is happening. Her water broke. I jumped out of the bed and thought, I need to get a birth plan. First step in my plan, put some pants on. We were ready to leave within minutes. There was just one obstacle in the living room we needed to get past. My in-laws, they happened to be visiting and they were sleeping on an air mattress in the living room. I asked my wife, what do you want to do about the people in the other room? Just go, she said. So we rushed past them. I didn't look at them. I had no idea if they were even awake. When we got to the car, I got a text from my mother-in-law. Where are you going? I wasn't sure whether I should tell her the truth and scare her or play it cool and tell her everything's fine. We're just heading out to some late night dance club. I decided to let her know what was happening when I knew what was happening. We arrived at the hospital in record time and asked the security guard where people go when they have a baby. We were supposed to take a tour of the hospital the following week, but now we needed the express tour. These were his exact words. I will never forget them. Make a left, take the elevator to the 2nd floor, make a right and a right and a right, go down the hall, make a right and a left and another right, then ring the doorbell. Somehow we did that. The nurse quickly examined my wife and told us that the baby wanted to show up early, but they would be able to delay birth for about a month. My wife would have to stay at the hospital until then. A cot was wheeled in for me. We updated the in-laws. We told them to stay at our place. There was no sense in having them come to the hospital and watching us try to get some sleep. Even though my wife was given medication to delay our child's arrival, her contractions unexpectedly started to intensify about an hour later. My cot was wheeled out and a pit crew of people raced in, including 2 nurses carrying an empty dessert tray. The on-call doctor, who we didn't know, took one look at my wife and declared, "The baby is coming. Do you have any questions?" I asked if there was anything we could give my wife because she was in so much pain. The doctor informed us there wasn't enough time. I so wanted to ask, is there anything you could give me? Because this is a really stressful environment. I was supposed to be in the park under a tree. Suddenly I'm in the trenches. Instead, I turned to my wife and asked if she wanted me to leave. She reached up, grabbed my hand and crushed the bones in it. I took that as a no. There was moaning and breathing and squeezing and pushing, and then there was our baby, the smallest human I had ever seen, crying so loud. The doctor said, "That crying is fantastic." Our baby was put on the dessert tray and taken to the NICU, a place I never knew existed until I walked into one. It's a place where professional guardian angels care for premature babies 24/7, keeping them safe and protected and alive. That morning, I called my in-laws and informed them, "Surprise, you're officially grandparents now." As I waited for them to arrive at the hospital, I saw a group of pregnant women with their husbands taking a tour. They were so giddy and chatty, like they were on a field trip. And I couldn't help but think, what a bunch of amateurs. After 5 long weeks in the hospital, we finally brought our baby home, healthy and happy. My wife has asked if I look at her differently now that I've seen her give birth. I'm slow sometimes. It wasn't until she asked this question that I realized that was the reason she didn't want me in the delivery room. I didn't hesitate to tell her. Of course, I look at her differently. She nourished and nurtured and sheltered a life with her body, and then brought that life into the world. All I did was have an orgasm. Didn't take very long. My wife is a superhero. I'm amazed by her and our daughter every day. Our daughter turned 10 this year. She's a backseat driver. She has a lot of opinions about my driving. She's actually just getting over a cold too. That's where I got it. She's pretty much lost her voice. I took her to the doctor the other day. She did not approve of my driving. I told her to rest her voice, try not to talk. And she said, "How can you expect me not to talk when you're being so annoying?" So she's doing just fine. I love her and her spunky personality, and all is well. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. She's in the other room.
Oh, nice. Thanks so much, Carlos, for letting us into that. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I'd not heard that before.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peg. And I'm going to go to sleep now. Enjoy the rest of the show. I know it's going to be wonderful. And thank you for letting me be a part of this.
We will. Yeah, get well.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, the next teller gave me a quote. The quote is from his own father. His father told him, "Use your head for something else besides a hat rack." And I wonder, was there a hidden message there, Stan?
I think that was it. No hidden messages.
So welcome, Stan Sellers, our next teller.
Thank you, Anne.
Yes.
In February 1986, early one Saturday morning, I got a call from my younger sister. She said, "Earl," now I'm a junior named after my dad, so some people call me Stanley, some people call me Earl. She said, "Earl, is Daddy out there?" Oh, my first thought was, what? See, my sister and my dad lived in Prince George's County, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. The out there she was referring to was here in Los Angeles, which takes some planning to get to and some packing. It's not right around the corner. All of this ran through my head, and the 2 or 3 seconds it took me to respond. I said, "Camille, what do you mean is Daddy out there? We can't find him." "Why can't you find him?" "Well, he left with a suitcase and we don't know where he went. We think he's coming out there." "Well, why would he be coming out there? Out here?" "Because there's you and there's Uncle Brockman. And I called Brock and he's not with him, so..." "Well, he's not with me." "Well, if he comes, can you call me?" "Sure." And she hung up. Now, packing a suitcase and leaving in a moment's notice didn't sound like something my dad would do. At the time, he was 51 years old, coherent, no health problems that I knew of. For about 13 years, he'd been working at the DC Public Schools Transportation Department. He was also an assistant pastor and a pastor at several churches in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, a career he began after owning several Sunoco gas stations in the area. Now, when I hung up with my sister, I wasn't worried, concerned, but I knew eventually he'd appear somewhere. All I could do was wait. Next day, I got a call. It was my dad. Now, when he was in a good mood, his first words on the phone would usually be, "Hey, man." And he'd proceed to say something that would make me laugh, like, "I got the birthday card, thank you. I've been sitting here about for an hour holding it upside down and shaking it, expecting a check to fall out, but so far nothing." When he was in a sentimental mood, he'd answer the phone by saying, "Hey, son," and say something really sweet, like, "I was just sitting here thinking about you. Thought I'd give you a call." But when he didn't have a lot of time, he was quick or just wanted to get off the phone, he'd say, "Hey," and go right into the thing, like, "Your Uncle Clarence is in the hospital. Make sure you give him a call." "Okay, Dad." On this day, it was the latter. He told me he was in LA staying with Brock, who's always been like a brother to him and an uncle to me. "I'll be out there tomorrow," my dad said, which meant we'll talk about it then. We probably agreed on a time. I told him I'd cook, and that's it. "All right, Dad, I'll see you tomorrow." The out there my dad was referring to was our home in the valley, the suburbs of LA, which is where my late wife and I had been living for about 6 months. Sarah and I met in 1980 while working at Bank of America, which was the farthest thing from my mind when I moved to LA in 1979. I moved out to be an actor and a comedian. I had been doing a little bit of both in Washington, D.C., when my cousin Harry, who moved out to LA in 1977, told me, "Stan, you can do all that in LA, man. They got everything out here. Anything you want to do, all you got to do is dream it." So in January of 79, with not much money, but a lot of confidence and determination, I moved to LA. But in 1980, after a year of going from temp job to temp job and open mics and theatrical auditions and commercial auditions and more temp jobs and more open mics, I decided stand-up and acting didn't provide enough security. Actually, in 1980, it provided zero security. Even though I was only 20, I was looking ahead to someday getting married and one day starting a family. Banking provided a salary, job title, benefits, room for advancement, a 2-week vacation, all the things my dad said a job should have in order to provide. As a kid, I used to see my dad get up early in the morning and go to work, put on his work shirt that had his name on it, Stanley, and he'd go to work at the gas station he owned Monday through Saturday, no matter the weather, never complained. I used to see him, his work clothes smelled like gas and grease, and his hands were rough from working on cars. At the end of the day, there was oil caked underneath his fingernails from putting his hands down on engines. One day he told me all of that oil underneath his fingernails, that was money. He said that was money to put food on the table, clothes on your back, and a roof over your head. And as a kid, I thought to myself, I hope before you put that food on the table, you washed your hands. But the bank did what it was supposed to do. I worked my way up from a teller to operations officer, and in 1982, Sarah and I got married. Then in 1986, after going to a smaller bank to double my salary, we bought the house in the valley. But while I loved being married, I was happy in my home and was looking forward to the future, I was not content where I was working. I'd gone from a bank that had hundreds of branches and lots of resources to one that had 3 branches and not a lot of help. On top of that, I brought my big banking ways to a small staff that was happy with the way things were before I got there. But the biggest disappointment was I knew there was something else I could be doing, something I truly loved. By 1986, comedy clubs were opening all over the country. My friends were making in a week what I was making in 2 weeks and working a lot less. So after sitting down with Sarah and going over some financials, I gave the bank my 2-week notice. A week later, my dad was in town. He came over, we had dinner, I cooked. I wasn't looking for his approval. I was looking for an affirmation that I was doing the right thing. He'd been supportive when I moved to California. He even bought the bus ticket. But this was different. We had a mortgage, and stand-up wasn't a sure thing. Neither was moving to LA, but getting a job at the bank changed that. After dinner, the three of us stayed in the kitchen. We weren't talking about why my dad was in LA, but Sarah, who could be very direct in an unexpected way, said, "So Dad, did you run away from home?" My dad kind of chuckled. He looked down and then he started to talk like he was going into a long story. He said he hadn't run away, he left. A few days before, while working on a school bus, he injured his hand, which was wrapped in a bandage. He said he was tired of working in the garage. He wanted to do something else, maybe move to a different department, maybe teach. And when I heard that, it was like an invitation. I could sense his frustration. But he kept talking about how important it was for us to do something we loved, how important it was for us to be happy. And when he finished, I offered that in the name of love and happiness, I gave the bank my 2-week notice and I was going to hit the road, be a stand-up comedian. And it got quiet. "Quit when?" he said, which sounded like he was about to tell me to go and get my job back. And I said, "Last week." And I said it like, if you are going to tell me to get my job back, I'm not going to do it. And it got real quiet again. And I got stronger in my resolve. And my dad said, "Good. You should quit your job and be a stand-up comedian. That's what you came out here to do." But before I could throw my arms up and celebrate the moment, he said, "I wanted to be a doctor. I was in school, but my dad called me and told me to come home because he didn't have enough money for me to finish." And all of a sudden, I could see my dad getting up on those mornings and going into work when it was raining and snowing. I saw his hands digging in those engines and working on cars. I saw him during the early 70s, during the gas shortages, when he had to close up early because he couldn't get his allotment. I saw him during moments when he was arguing with customers and they wanted to make it and instead of it being about a money transaction, it became a question about his race. I saw all of that. And all of that time, it occurred to me then that he'd rather been holding a stethoscope instead of a wrench. He wanted to be looking at x-rays instead of under a hood. And he probably wished his hands were smooth instead of rough. And here he was telling me to go do what I wanted to do. What could I say to that? What I wanted to say was, "Come on, Dad. Quit your job. You can do it. The two of us will run away and join the circus together. Come on." But I didn't. And I couldn't. I knew he wouldn't. He had a mortgage too. 3 days later, my dad went back home. And for the next 13 years, he stayed at that job. He moved to different departments. He worked as a foreman, mechanic, supervisor, and as a teacher. In 1999, he retired and he started driving a local commuter bus until they laid him off after he failed a physical. He said they asked him to raise his hands above his head and he couldn't do it. An activity he said he'd never have to perform while driving the bus. He continued on as an assistant pastor, teaching young ministers how to write sermons and prepare Sunday service and get ready for, and how to host marriages and baptisms. He did that until 2005 when he passed away on his 80th birthday. My last words to him were, thank you. Because from 1986 until my second child was born in 1996, I traveled the country as a stand-up comedian. For the last 28 years, I've made a living as an on-camera and voiceover actor, and I've never taken any of it for granted. I think of my dad and his dream and of having to make that sacrifice to provide for us. I think of that every time I step in front of an audience to tell a joke, every time I step on a sound stage in front of a microphone or a camera, and every time I tell a story in front of an audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Can you hear me, Stan?
Yes,
Okay.
there you are.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that was beautiful. Your last words to your dad were thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, makes me love him. Mm,
He's a
yeah.
good man. Yep.
Yeah. Well, our next teller sent me something to introduce her with. And it is, if you want to go somewhere, you must let yourself go. And that's from a fortune cookie in Johnson City, Tennessee. Now, welcome Angela Lloyd, please.
Hello, good evening. Lovely stories. Thank you, everyone. In 1982, I traveled from southern Florida, Pompano, back to Sarasota. It was New Year's Eve, and I was going back so that I could see my friends. I had been in graduate school there, and I also had a storage unit in Sarasota, Florida. It was at a place called You Store, You Lock, You Pay. And I was very proud of my storage unit because when I set up the bookcase, I had all my books on it. I could pull up that long metal door, step in, and any book I wanted to find, I could put my hands on. And it also contained things from my family and myself. I had left the apartment after graduate school, and I had left in 1980 because they were going to take the building down and put up something much newer and fancier. So it was New Year's Eve. I had been to the storage unit, and my friends had gathered at the house where I was staying, and they were playing bridge. And I don't play bridge. And I didn't want to cross it now that I had come to it. And so I was trying to think of something fun to do while they were playing bridge. And I remembered that I had a friend who lived nearby, whose home I could walk to, and I could even knock on her door, and maybe she would wake up, and if she was asleep, or she would let me in and we would have a visit. And I thought, and I could take my guitar, and I could even put on a fancy dress, which I did. I put on one of my costumes from my solo shows. I had designed it after the woman in Godspell, the woman who sang Day by Day. I sang Day by Day in our college production of Godspell. And then I loved that multi-layered dress so much that I made myself one. And it was one that I put on every time I did a show for children and families. So I put on my glad rags. That was the name of the dress, was the name of my show. Very fancy dress. Took my guitar, and I said goodbye to my friends. I said I was going to go for a walk and go visit Marlis Fix. Now, my boyfriend who was there at the house, he was a runner. His name was David, and we got to know Jim Fix because David entered every 10K race that they had in Sarasota, Florida. And Jim Fix would come every year for a run, and he would give a talk the night before, and we always would go. And when he started publishing his complete book of running calendar, I would always buy the complete book of running calendar for David, and that's where he put his events of his life. So Marlis was Jim Fix's mama, and I had met her at the Episcopal Church. My mother had passed away very suddenly in 1980, and I had come back from Mallorca, Spain, which was where she passed away very suddenly in her sleep. I had come back to Sarasota, and that was where I began to develop my solo performance work. This was really based on my mother as a composer and pianist who always initiated, many times initiated, any performances that she did. And as a composer, she was always choosing poetry that she loved to set to music. And I had come back from her death and decided, well, if my mama can call people up and say she would like to play a concert, if it's part of a series or something, perhaps I could call people and say, are you interested in producing an event for families or children? I'm ready. And people had started to say yes, quite a few, which was very fortunate. So that's where I'd been for 2 years, either working with a children's theater or touring. And now I was home, and now I had my dress, and now I put it on, and I took my guitar, and out the door I went to walk and visit Marlis. Did I tell you that she and I wrote letters to each other in church with those donation envelopes and those tiny little pencils? I loved her so much, and she was very good to me. And the church was close walking distance from my house, and sometimes she would come back to my house with me. She was a really good friend. And I thought it's pretty safe. I could sing outside her window or outside her door, and she probably would open it and let me in. And it had been at least 1.5 years since I'd seen her. So I was walking down the Tamiami Trail. This is a 4-lane road with an empty island space for making turns. So it's quite a wide road. And this was around 10:30, close to 11. And as I approached the street where Marlis lived, I noticed there was a fellow sitting on the sidewalk with his back up against the metal box that was the power box for changing the lights. And I noticed the shoes he was wearing, which were very white. They must have been maybe a day or two old. And he was sitting very comfortably, legs outstretched, and next to him was a small Pan Am bag. And I remembered my Pan Am bag from when I was a young child. I walked up to the fellow and I said, "Happy New Year, Happy New Year." He looked up and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he looked up and he said, hello, Happy New Year. And then he was looking down the street. And I said, "Are you waiting for something?" And he looked up at me and he said, "Well, I'm actually waiting for a man who jumped bail in Texas, and my brother is in a convertible Volkswagen at the other end of the street, and I'm waiting for him because when my brother goes into the house, if the fellow runs, I'm going to have a foot chase." Oh, I said, "Wow. Good evening." I said, "Are your shoes new? they're so clean. Are your shoes new? And he said, yes. He said, they were given to me for Christmas by my mama. And I said, oh, he said, I can't wait to have a foot chase in these brand new shoes. I said, have you been breaking them in? Like, do you like to run? He said, I love to run. And I said, do you go out for runs a lot? He said, I do. I mean, I prefer to chase something actually, but you know, I do like to go out for runs. And I said, my boyfriend runs 10K runs, and then he gives me the free t-shirts they give him. He looked at me like, what? What? I said, hey, what have you got in your Pan Am bag? He said, well, I used to carry a grenade and a gun in it, but I just have a gun in it right now. And I said, oh. He said, my dad carried a grenade in his Pan Am bag and he pulled it out by my mistake one night and he did a whole lot of damage in a hotel room. So I don't carry grenades in it anymore. I said, hey, you know, guess what I carried in my Pan Am bag? I did not give him a chance to guess. He just looked at me. I said, I had a Barbie doll when I was growing up in Caracas, Venezuela, and my Pan Am bag that looks just like your Pan Am bag, it fit my Barbie doll and her wedding dress. And you know, I never thought I'd ever have her wedding dress because those were really expensive. But in Caracas, Venezuela, if you got a full tank of gas, you could have a free Barbie doll outfit. And that's how I got her wedding dress, which I just adored. You know, my Ken doll, I never got any clothes for him. The fellow sitting on the ground was like looking at me sometimes, but really every now and then sort of lifting up to look down the street. And then I said, you know, I never had any clothes for Ken, but I just used to let him carry the flowers when I married my Barbie doll to the Ken doll. He didn't need any clothes as far as I was concerned. That little red bathing suit he arrived in, it was just fine. And by the way, my boyfriend, who's a runner, that's what he wears. He wears a red bathing suit too. He's a great runner. Hey, by chance, do you know who Jim Fix is? The fellow he was getting a little kind of antsy. And I said, you know, I'm going to go see Jim Fix's mother. He was, you know, he's the runner. He wrote the complete book of running. That's his leg on the cover of the book. Did you know that? I mean, they were supposed to have a model, but the model didn't show up and Jim was there to just approve the model. And so they said, well, we could just take a picture of your leg. And he said, okay. The fellow was starting to like extend his toes like a ballerina, like stretching his heels and his toes. And I said, you know, I'm on my way to see Jim Fix's mama, Marlis. She's a good friend of mine. And I'm going to sing a song outside. I'm going to sing a song outside her door. I'm going to sing this song. If you can sing it with me if you want. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I got my guitar out. I had it slung on my back. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. You could sing it if you want. He looked at me and he said, I am not singing that song with you. I said, but why not? I'll never tell anybody you did. Don't you know it? He goes, of course I know it. I said, we're at the Tamiami Trail. Nobody could hear you sing. I mean, some songs are like vaccinations. And if you sang it, you might feel better. He said, I'm waiting to go in and catch a guy who jumped bail in Texas. I am not twinkle, twinkle, come on, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond, come on, in the sky. Guess what? There's 4 verses. When the blazing sun is gone, when nothing shines upon, then you show your little light, twinkle, twinkle all the night. Then the traveler in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. All of a sudden, he put his finger in his ear. What? What? You got him? But I didn't even see you. Oh, I can see you have him. He was just coming out of his house. Like, where was he going? Oh, he was gonna go get some more beer. Oh, so you have him? I mean, like, he's not gonna get away. That means I'm not gonna have a foot chase. Ah, I was looking forward to a foot chase. Well, no, because you got him, right? I don't need to come home now. I mean, I don't need to go back to the hotel. I'll just see you later. You got him, okay? You sure you don't need help? Okay, all right. And then he sort of hung up by taking his finger out of his ear. I said, excuse me, but I said, what was that? Were you, he said, my brother got hit in the head with a baseball when he was a kid. And when they fixed his ear, it turned out he could pick up radio signals. And so my dad had the same thing done to my ear. And my brother and I, we can talk to each other. And all we have to do, I mean, they put something in our ear, but all I have to do is I just press my ear and he can hear me and I can hear him. He goes, they caught him. He caught him. He was just stumbling out of his house to go get some more beer. And my brother had thought maybe he'd just go up to the house and knock on the door. And he was about to knock on the door when the guy opened the door to come out and go get some beer. And my brother just put handcuffs on him. And he goes, we just made ourselves a bunch of money. We're done. We just made a bunch of money. You know, there's a last verse of Twinkle Little Star. It goes, when the bright blazing sun is gone, when nothing shines upon, then you show your little light, twinkle, twinkle all the night. He said, don't you tell anybody I sang that song. I won't. And I said, you know, I'm going to go to Marlis's house. You don't have to stay here anymore, right? I mean, you want to just walk with me to Marlis's house? If she opens the door, you could say hi. He's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to stay for a visit, but I'll walk you to Marlis's house. And he walked me down the street to Marlis's house. And he left before I sang for her. And I remember turning and watching him go down the street. And it looked really almost like the end of a movie. This long shadow of his lanky body, his brilliant white shining shoes in the night. And he disappeared, got down to the edge and end of the street and turned. And I sang for Marlis. She did let me in her house. I had a very sweet visit with her. I did not tell her about meeting a bounty hunter on my way. And then I went back to the party at my friend's house. And I told my friends that I met a bounty hunter who could talk to his brother by pressing his ear, and how they caught a man and they made $10,000 and it was a bunch of money. And they said, Angela, he was pulling your leg. He just made that whole thing up. I said, no, he didn't. He was sitting there. He was on a stakeout. I mean, he told me all about it. They said, Angela, he was pulling your leg. I went, no. So we had a party. We went to sleep. We got up the next day and we all drove to the Waffle Iron where we love to have breakfast together. And we had breakfast, and then we were coming home on the Tamiami Trail when we noticed a convertible Volkswagen was pulled over to the side of the road, and there was a fellow in the driver's seat. The flashers were on, and he had his finger in his ear, and he was talking and making lots of gestures with his hands. And I looked to see if there was somebody in the back seat. I didn't see anybody in the back seat. And I showed my friends. I said, "Look, there's his brother. There he is in the convertible Volkswagen. And he's talking to his brother like a phone." And they just laughed and laughed. And we went home, back to the house. We started a whole new, brand new year. And I've always believed completely everything that young man told me. I've never had any doubt whatsoever that what he told me was the truth. Thank you.
You know, believing is a beautiful thing, isn't it, Angela?
Yes.
Putting your whole self in. All right. So we'll get to look at that again on YouTube. And in the meantime, I'm going to introduce our last teller with his quote. Now, he's a graduate advisor to students in the UCLA graduate program in English literature. He tells them, if you don't like to read, then for God's sake, surround yourself with people who do. It makes such a difference. Welcome, Michael Lambert.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, everybody. Okay, this shouldn't take long. I'm just going to tell you the story of my life as a disaffected Christian Scientist. Or the other working title is Mary Baker Eddy Fucked Me Up. So my unlikely spot, my unlikely place was a government-run HIV testing and treatment clinic on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue in New York City, in Harlem. And it wasn't that unlikely for me to be in Harlem because I lived on West 107th Street, so I was Harlem adjacent. And I worked up in Westchester County, and so I would often walk through Harlem to catch the Metro North line at 125th and Lexington. But it was very unlikely for me to be in an HIV testing clinic. It was 1992, so a large portion of the AIDS crisis had already unfolded. And unlike a lot of my gay comrades, who I have a lot of more respect for than for myself, really, my survival mode for getting through that crisis was I activated the family tradition that I grew up with, the family motto, which was, no problem can't be fixed if you just ignore it long enough. And so I just pretended that it wasn't happening, or that if it was happening, it certainly wasn't going to happen to me. And I came by that view honestly because I was raised as a kid in a religion called Christian Science. And I was a really devout child Christian Scientist. My parents were horrible Christian Scientists. They drank, they took medicine, they went to doctors, they did all the things you're not supposed to do. But I had just loved Sunday school and the religion. And so I went in hook, line, and sinker for this philosophy that the human condition was something that you could and should understand your way out of. And yet you should rise above being human to the state of spirituality, which was the only true state, and all of human existence was just a lie. And if you understood that truth clearly enough, you would experience perfect health. It had its good points. It taught that God is love. That's wonderful. God is love. But God wouldn't really be there for you unless you understood him. We used to say him so clearly that you sort of rose above human existence. So I had left that religion years prior because of the gay thing, because like other religions, they just weren't really fond of homosexuals. And I couldn't seem to heal myself of the homosexuality, although there are articles in the Christian Science literature that tell you how you can do that. I went to the clinic because I had a new boyfriend and we were living together, and it had been a few months, and he was HIV positive. And we were careful in what we did. And so sexually, so I didn't think I was in much danger, but I thought just as a courtesy more than anything else to him, I would take this test. So I go up these dark stairs to this dimly lit place, and I take my number. It's all anonymous because there's a lot of shame about HIV back then. So everything's anonymous, no names, and they take blood, and I go away and I go to work. And I come back in 2 weeks, and I'm feeling smug because I'm an ex-Christian Scientist. I know I can rise above anything physical. And even though I never really had succeeded at it, but I still thought I could. So they take me into a room, and I see the look on the guy's face, and I'm thinking, oh no, it can't be. But his face kind of gave him away. And he said, your test came back positive. It was 1992. So a positive HIV test in that year was a blow. They were right. I was and am HIV positive. I've survived long enough to the point where I'm fortunate that it's something I live with without thinking much about at all. But back then, that was a big deal. And I remember this, I have a hazy recollection of a social worker asking me if I had a network to support me. And I just thought, oh God, a network to support me. He's talking about a network to support me while I die. And I was stunned. But I did the Christian Science thing. I left the clinic. I got in, I had a car back then. I drove my car up to Pelham, New York to my job, and I just pretended it didn't happen. I was lucky because I had a close friend named Elaine Hughes, who was from Vicksburg, Mississippi, but lived down the street from me in New York. Elaine had breast cancer, and she was really eclectic in always trying all kinds of different healing modalities. And I felt safe telling her this news. She was the only person I felt safe sharing it with. I had my boyfriend, Tirsa. Other than that, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my doctor. That may sound weird, but I had it in my mind. I had health insurance that I was paying for monthly, private, because I'm an American and the system, it was worse then than it is now. And it was important to me to have it. And I was afraid I would lose it if I told people that I had this pre-existing condition called HIV. So I went into denial and I pushed forward in my life. 1993, 1994, 1995, some medication started to become available in 1995, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to tell anybody anything. 1996, 1997, I'm in Vermont, Stowe, Vermont, skiing, and I can't breathe, but I'm pushing through, and I'm sweating a lot, but I'm pushing through, and I'm skiing with my friends, and then I'm driving back to New York, and I have a cough. And it's no big deal. It's a cough. So I ignore that too. But something happened to that cough. At one point, it wasn't about, it's hard to describe it. I felt this weakness, like I was just going to kind of pass out. And I called my friend Elaine because she was the only person who knew this secret about me. And I told her that I didn't know what to do. And she said, well, you've got to call your doctor and you've got to tell him you're HIV positive so he can treat you. And I did have a doctor, and I just didn't like telling him too much about my body. So I called and I told him, and I went in and he examined me and he said, I'm sending you 2 blocks up the street to 88th Street to Dr. Posner's office. Oh no, I'm sending you for a lung x-ray, and then I'm sending you to Dr. Posner's office. He's the lung doctor up the street on 88th Street. I said, okay. So I went for my x-ray. They made me hold my arms up while they x-rayed me. I could barely hold my arms up because I couldn't hold them up without coughing to death. But I managed to get through the x-ray. And you know, x-ray technicians, they're supposed to be very poker-faced, but I could tell something was up by the way this woman was looking at my x-ray. Anyway, I did as I was told, and I went up to 88th Street. And here's where things started to happen, good things. I walked into Dr. Posner's office, the pulmonologist. Oops, sorry. And he looked at my x-rays and he smiled and he said, wow. He said, these are amazing. He said, this is PCP pneumonia and we never get to see it this advanced. I don't ever get to see x-rays like this because it's so treatable. You are really far along the road with this PCP. And I was like, oh, great, that's great news. I'm really glad to hear that I'm making medical history in a weird way. He said, here's what you're going to do. He said, you're going to go down to 77th Street to Lenox Hill Hospital. You're going to go into the emergency room. You're going to ask for Manny. Manny's going to take you back and put you in a little room in the emergency room. And he's going to start you on an antibiotic IV drip. When a room opens up, upstairs in the hospital, he's going to get you up there and check you in. And you're going to be in that hospital for 2 weeks on an IV drip. And then you're going to go on HIV meds. And you're going to live a long and healthy life. It was the weirdest thing, but I couldn't argue with him. He hypnotized me in a really good way. So much so that as I almost skipped down Lexington Avenue to that hospital. I knew I was going to be taken care of. It was so opposite of my religious upbringing. I didn't have to think about anything. I didn't have to understand anything. I just got to go and let people care for me. I had a ball in my 2 weeks in the hospital. They put me in a private room because they weren't sure if I had tuberculosis. And I was sure it was the same room that Liz Taylor had been in when she was there because it had an amazing view. And friends came and visited me in the hospital. I had recently joined a 12-step group for another matter altogether. And I didn't know those folks too well, but they were showing up and visiting me in the hospital. And I loved being in the hospital. I loved the experience of being cared for. I loved the certainty I had from Dr. Posner that I was going to be okay. And I got out in 2 weeks and 2 days. I was weak. I was a little frail, but I managed it. And Dr. Posner's prediction has come true. 30 seconds. Here's what happened to me. This has been an ongoing process. I was looking for God most of my early life by transcending being human. The way for me to find God was to rise above the human condition. And what I have learned in my journey, for me, I had to let go of God in order to find her, or in order to let her find me. And I'm still partly a Christian Scientist insofar as I look for spiritual experience, but I don't look for it in the sky anymore. I look for it, I experience it in my body, in my physicality, in my brokenness, in my frailty, in my being subject to sickness and death and health and life. I don't look up for it. I sink down into it. And that has made all the difference. I just want to add, I haven't told this story in about 15 years. What's changed since, as I was writing it out for tonight, I realize now that that impulse to rise above and to escape the human condition, that's part of being human too. That's part of it too. I don't have to feel superior because I no longer look for the invisible, because the invisible is also part of this whole thing that we're engaged in. Anyway, thank you. Thanks for coming into my kitchen, and thank you, Anne, for having me.
I just wrote it down. One thing you said, Mike, I don't look for it in the sky anymore. And as I was listening to that and thinking, we find it in other people also, huh? Yeah.
Connection.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad that you chose to to retell that after 15 years. I'm so glad you did. How did it, how was it how was it retelling it?
It's much more fun to tell it now because the stakes of being HIV positive aren't so scary as they were. So it's, I don't know, it's easier. And I have a Facebook group of ex-Christian Scientists that I commune with almost daily basis, you know, and we're all learning to occupy the physicality and temporality of ourselves, because we were taught for so long that the name of the game was perfection and non-materiality.
Yeah, I didn't really know that about Christian Scientists. I just know that word perfect etymologically means a thorough making. So to me, our whole life is that we're being made.
I like that. It's about wholeness.
I also like that you said that you knew you were going to be taken care of, because I've experienced that recently with a couple doctors, and you just get that feeling. Boy, that's pretty great feeling. Oh, yeah. Well, Mike, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for showing up and sharing the best you have to offer. I really appreciate it. I see you, Peg, over there, and I see Roxanne and Angela and everybody. So, yeah, you can unmute yourselves if you would like to say something to or ask a question. Unmute yourselves if you want, okay? And if you want to ask a question, do it now before I wish you
Good night.
well, and hoping that your cup overflows with gratitude. This season that we're approaching overflows with gratitude.
I just want to thank you, Anne, for putting this together. It was wonderful.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, boy, we're looking at these people who make it, so it's something else. And alrighty, no questions, and we're gonna. Oh, Elena, Betsy. Okay, we're gonna.
Is this the last one for the year?
You know, it is. I was gonna say that we're gonna come back in 2024, and if anyone has an idea for a theme, send it to me, or send it to the church, and the church will get it to me, because I've got some ideas, but I know you do too. And this is a group project. We're all in this together. Amen. So if you have an idea for a theme, toss it this way. Okay, good to see everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Everybody
you.
have a safe holiday, safe New Year.
Happy holidays, everybody.
All the best.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Okay, see you later.
Stories.
Bye, Aaron.
Bye, Aaron.
Bye.